Hello, my friend, and welcome to Rhodes Smart Camp. I am speaking to you now from the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, and I want to pay tribute to Brad Garrett and the MGM Grand itself. But before we get to that, let me just say, wow, what a week this has been. There was the horrific assassination of Charlie Kirk in Utah. Which, wow, holy fuck, what is happening to this country? And then the highlight of the week, I mean, the shows were, well, I'll talk more about this week and the events. But then, like, the highlight was Saturday night, this past Saturday, with the Canelo Crawford fight that happened in Las Vegas. And there was real excitement, like on the Las Vegas Strip. I took a walk. And all these Mexican guys were selling bootleg T-shirts for like $20, and very festive, and concerts by Mexican artists at the MGM. So lots of Mexican people, Mexican Americans, Mexican people, Mexico Mexicans. I'm a moron. And they're all dressed up, walking around the MGM, and I love when people from Mexico get dressed up. There's, very cowboy element, and cowboy hats and big belt buckles and, cool alligator boots, that kind of thing, ostrich, whatever you have. But let me talk first about my history with Las Vegas. Years ago, I was such a snob. I wanted nothing to do with Las Vegas. So it's funny, how opinions change. And I'm sitting here now at the MGM Grand. It's, one of my favorite gigs I do every year. But the first time I played in Las Vegas was 20 years ago. Oh, so like my father loved Las Vegas, and he loved coming to Vegas. He was living in Anaheim for years. And my dad, this is before I ever started playing here. My dad always wanted me. He was like, man, you should play in Vegas. You could get a residency somewhere. And he was just always pushing me to do Las Vegas. And I wanted nothing to do with it. And the first time I played in Las Vegas was 20 years ago. Across the street from the MGM Grand, there used to be the Tropicana Hotel Casino that they tore down last year. I had so many memories there, things that happened, good and bad. But the first two times I played in Las Vegas, at the Tropicana was a club called the Laugh Stop. It was the Laugh Stop at the Trop. And that was a gig that was there for, 20, 30 years, something like that. And it was past its prime when I did it. The gig wasn't that great. But my father came and saw me, and I just, never forget, seeing my dad. I loved seeing my dad laughing. He had the best laugh, and seeing him laugh at my jokes and watching me perform. The buttons on his shirt almost popped off. He was so proud. So, yeah, and I remember my dad drove over from Anaheim. And I always remember, my dad always liked to drink. He always liked a cocktail. And I remember him, bringing a cooler into his room full of beer and cocktail mixers and stuff. And I got a chuckle out of it. My dad was like very adamant about, why pay, top dollar at the bars when, you could buy your own stuff at a grocery store. And anyway, so my dad, he came over and visited me whenever I did those gigs. And then I remember, you used to walk, there was a bridge that went from the Tropicana over Tropicana Boulevard to the MGM. And I'll never forget, walking with my father, because the Tropicana, it was old and outdated 20 years ago. But I remember walking over this bridge, and that bridge that used to be over the Tropicana Boulevard was always like a gauntlet of like homeless people and desperate people, begging for money, and, people with kids, and just people with, no shoes, and like, dirty feet like you've never seen before. Just, real sadness. And then you would cross that bridge and you come to the MGM and it's all sparkling and brand new. And I always associate the MGM Grand with glamorous, classy Las Vegas. And, you'd cross that bridge and you come into the MGM and you go down these escalators. And already, 3 steps into the MGM Grand and you're like, yeah, this is what Vegas, what you imagine it to be at its finest. And I remember me and my dad coming over to the MGM Grand and watching a game at the sports book, putting down a $20 bet on something and just hanging out with my dad and walking around the MGM. And I remember, specifically telling my father, man, one day I'm going to play at the MGM Grand. So Brad Garrett is very much instrumental in, he is the reason why I perform at the MGM Grand, but he's been instrumental in my evolution of how I feel about Las Vegas. So that comedy stop at the Trop, great comedy history. It was originally Rodney Dangerfield's, and a lot of those early HBO comedy specials, the young comedian specials, they were called, and Rodney Dangerfield would host, and there was one that really blew me away, the famous one when Sam Kinison comes out and just destroyed the place. And I remember seeing, Gary Shandling and Bill Hicks and all these legends of comedy doing that Rodney Dangerfield's young comedian specials. I lived for those specials when I was starting out and dreaming of being a comedian. So they happened in that room that became the laugh stop at the Trop. And then thankfully, Brad Garrett took that place over. And the original Brad Garrett's Comedy Club was in the Tropicana. And it was amazing how he had transformed the place because there was no dressing room. So he remodeled this room. I don't know what it was, a storage room or something like that. And there was this massive, beautiful dressing room that he put in there. And, with couches and, free booze and whatever, just cool posters and comedy history and stuff. So I forget, Brad Garrett's Comedy Club was there for 5, 6, 7 years, something like that. And I started playing there. And that room that had, fallen in disrepair, that was known as the Laugh Stop, became this shiny diamond thanks to Brad Garrett's love. And that was really cool. And then I played there a bunch of times and was very impressed with the transformation. And then I got to know Brad Garrett, who is probably one of the finest human beings in all of show business. I'll elaborate more on what a beautiful human he is later. But then Brad Garrett's Comedy Club moved to the MGM Grand. I think 12 years ago now. I'm not exactly sure. I should look these things up. But nonetheless, then I finally got to achieve my dream of performing at the MGM Grand. And it's too bad my father was killed by a drunk driver in 2009, and he never got to see me perform here. Because there's really, as a performer, as a comedian, what a great feeling to see your name and your photo, your promo photo, up on that massive jumbo MGM Grand sign, and they're flashing the different concerts and events, and then boom, there you are. And, that's pretty much a beautiful achievement on its own. It's too bad my father never got to see it. But, and then the people that work at Brad Garrett's Comedy Club, they're family members of Brad's. His brother, a beautiful story that shouldn't be forgotten. Brad Garrett started the room with his brother, Paul, and his brother managed the place. And Paul was such a sweet guy. And I remember right before the show would start, he'd come into the dressing room. This is when it was at the Tropicana and when it was at the MGM Grand. And he had such a beautiful smile and spirit. And he'd say, "Let's make this a great show, everybody." And it was just so sweet. You had to attack the stage with the best you had to give when, even Michael Jordan needed a coach. Just those little coaching tips and things people say to you right before a show are very important for your mentality. If you're having a bad day or going through some bullshit, just to flick that switch and go out there and entertain the people. So unfortunately, Brad's brother Paul died of cancer, which was really heartbreaking. He was a beautiful guy. And I really could sympathize with, I can understand how, the loss, because my darling little sister died of breast cancer in 2011. So, it's Brad's family that are running the place. And I've been playing here through the years, and they've become like my family. So, there's some gigs where the people who work there, they don't give a shit. It's just a job. They're not emotionally invested in it. But the manager of Brad Garrett's is this woman named Cindy, and she used to manage Zanies in Chicago, and then she managed the Rosemont Zanies and the Pheasant Run Zanies, which no longer exists. So I've known her for years, and when you're working with like people who all care. And they're like family, and they treat you like family. It's really a beautiful feeling. It's not like working. It's it's magic, for lack of a better definition. But life is a long time, and things happen to you, and. And I want to talk about Brad Garrett's generosity. I remember years ago there was a comedian. A lot of comedians don't have health insurance. This guy who was on the show, this is 15 years ago. He was ill. And Brad told him, he goes, listen, man, take the night off. You go to urgent care, get yourself tested. And if you need to take a couple days off, I'll pay for the urgent care and I'll cover your, nights off. And Brad took care of the guy, and he took a couple nights off to take care of himself. And, you almost never see that in show business, in comedy. You're sick. Well, boom, you're replaced. And Brad's generosity and kindness, just absolutely amazing. And I've had a couple of rough weeks here. I remember the week after I was getting divorced, I came here. I wasn't enjoying myself. There was a couple of, what was it, a few years, 3 years ago, after the Toronto woman wiped her ass with my heart. That wasn't good. But in 2021, this is the most beautiful thing I can say about Brad Garrett. And he texts me too, where he cares about me and I care about him. But it was in 2021, I was playing here in the summer, and I got COVID on the very first day. I remember Carl LeBeau had just died, and they had the memorial for him at Brad Garrett's Comedy Club. It was on a Sunday. It was the day before I was starting on Monday at Brad Garrett's Comedy Club. And, I was hugging I was so upset. I think Carl's death came not long after Paul's death. And, it shook me. I was pretty sad. And then I was hugging all these people, and I caught COVID. And that was the Delta variant. And I tested positive. The next morning I woke up, I was, deathly ill. And I went and got tested, and it turned out that I had COVID. And Brad Garrett said, listen, man, you can quarantine at the MGM. Stay as long as you like. If you need a month, stay a month. I'll take care of it. And I did not do one single show that week, and Brad Garrett paid me in full. And I'll never forget that. He didn't have to pay me a dime. I didn't do a single show. And it was already kind enough that he, how many people got to quarantine at the MGM? And, they put the comedians up in the back of the property at the MGM Grand are these, it's called the Signature Towers, and there's 3 of them. And it's such a lovely place to stay. And the best thing about it is there's this massive bathtub. It's almost the size of like a jacuzzi, and it has like a jacuzzi feature where you hit the button and it churns the water, and it's massive. And I remember I've never been that sick where when I had that Delta variant, COVID, I had everything, coughing, sneezing, body aches, headaches, sore throat. It was rough. And every day I could sit in this massive bathtub and just turn on that jacuzzi feature. You know, my muscles were aching, my body. It was so difficult, and it was so nice to rehabilitate myself, and every day just sit in this massive bathtub with the jacuzzi feature on, and it was really nice. And I'll be eternally grateful to Brad Garrett for, you know, his generosity in paying me in full. What a beautiful guy. But thankfully, I've had, you know, so many killer shows at Brad Garrett's. And, you know, normally when he's not here, like he wasn't here Monday through Wednesday, and I headlined doing 40-minute sets. And then when Brad is here, it's fantastic because he hosts the show. And he does like 30 minutes up front. And Brad is so great. He rips everyone in the audience. He's like a modern Don Rickles, but better than Rickles, I would have to say. And he's so sharp, and and the place is going crazy. The people absolutely love him. And, you know, thankfully I've had, you know, so many killer sets at this club. And like I said, you know, you feel like you're playing for the Yankees and you want to, you know, hit a grand slam for the team. And then the people who work here, you know, Ed and Zach and Sarah, it's so great that these people, I was talking to Ed last night and Zach after the show, and they're just telling me these jokes of mine that I don't even do anymore. Like, yeah, man, there's like, I quote these jokes all the time, and they're telling me and asking me about them. And it was just like so flattering to be loved and for people to remember your jokes that you did, you know, 10, 15 years ago that you've forgotten about. One of the jokes Ed was asking me about, he said, you know, I think of this line all the time what was the line where you said the guy had a ball sack draped across his nose? And I was like, so stunned that he remembered this joke. But it's something I did, oh my God, 15, 20 years ago. And I'd completely forgotten about the joke. But it was a true incident that I had seen like 20 years ago. I was in Austin, Texas, and I'm driving around. And there was a protest in front of a Honda automobile dealership, 20 or 30 people. And they had placards and signs, and they're marching angrily. And their signs said things like, "Gay is not okay," and "The word of God condemns homosexual acts." And I stopped. There was a guy who looked like Moses. I figured he was in charge. And I asked him, I said, what's going on? And he said, well, it seems the people at this Honda dealership hired a gay employee. And the Lord doesn't condone homosexual acts. I forget exactly the wording, but and I said, you know, I thought the Bible says to love your neighbor. It doesn't say go to his work and bother him. If those people truly would have been following the Bible, their signs would have said, my gay neighbor drives a Honda and I love him. My Peter Lickin' Honda driving neighbor gets 44 miles to the gallon on the highway, and when he doesn't have a ball sack draped across his nose, is getting 33 in the city. Something like that. Anyway, so Brad Garrett's this week, I mean, everyone with a heart and a brain had to be appalled by that that Charlie Kirk assassination, and oh my God, and then seeing people like, laughing about it and clips online just makes me want to throw my phone into the trash. But I mean, that's happened whenever there's been like when Democrat people, those Minnesota people got murdered. I saw people celebrating that. And when Nancy Pelosi's husband got the hammer to the head, people laughing about that. And that assassination attempt on Trump. I saw, it's just disgusting how anyone could find enjoyment out of all this political violence. And I think it's going to get worse. And I think that this country is getting less fun to live in. You know what I'm saying? And no one is living up to their religion if violence is part of the things that you find joy in. Anyway, I was disgusted, and so like the very next day that happened on September 10th. On September 11th, Garrett was here, and then he did a couple of Trump jokes, and some guy asked him, he said, do you not like Trump? And Brad said no, and then the guy got up and left, and then like 4 other people got up and left. And I think it was just a very sensitive moment. And I mean, everyone's so, fucking emotional right now. And anyway, it was just a really weird vibe on the show. And then I had to come out and close it. And man, that was a tough one. And, I don't think it was my fault. It wasn't like the times before where I was dealing with a heartbreak like a puss and couldn't snap back to happy fun Tom. This was just, people staring blankly like, who are you, punk, and what do you got? And I just kept shoveling meat, great jokes. And anywho, that was a bizarre moment. But thankfully, every other show this week has been murderous. And it's so fun, working with Brad. And he's such a generous guy, like I was saying. So I was happy, other than that one show on September 11th, that I murdered all week. Because, also, I want to destroy every time I'm here to, erase the memory of the couple of times I was here when I was heartbroken and wasn't fun on stage. So I really feel like I'm fun again. I've got my full performance power back. And, nothing compares to the MGM Grand. I mean, the Bellagio's got its fountains, and then the fake Eiffel Tower is cute to go up to the top. But the MGM Grand is where all of the best and biggest events are happening. So, like, in my mind, if you're performing at the MGM Grand, you are, top of the list, baby. And so, like I was saying before, because of the Canelo fight, there were all these like great Mexican artists performing at the MGM concerts every night. And just seeing all these Mexican people just dressed up in their best clothes, which is cowboy elegance. And it's exciting. And the Canelo fight, that was great. We got to watch it in the dressing room. It was on Netflix. The show. Oh, and another great thing about Brad Garrett's at the MGM, all the other comedy clubs in Vegas, you do 2 shows a night. So, you're occupied the whole week. Brad Garrett's, there's 1 show every night, 8 o'clock, so you're done at 9:30. It's a breeze. So that Canelo-Crawford fight started at 10 p.m., 10:30 p.m., and we got to stay and watch it in the dressing room at Brad Garrett's. And like I was saying, what Brad did to that dressing room at the old Tropicana, the original Brad Garrett's Comedy Club that was over there, it was magic. And you can tell the guy loves comedians. And so the dressing room, the green room at Brad Garrett's at the MGM, it's one of the best green rooms in all of comedy. And there's, beautiful furniture, and then there's this like old like a thing that like chemists or pharmacists used to have. These like wooden cabinet with like 100 drawers on it, and Brad keeps it full of candy, all these different kind of candies, and there's snacks and free booze if you want it. I don't, because I don't drink anymore. And it was really great watching this Canelo Crawford fight, and Crawford won, and it was a great fight. I love traditional boxing, and I'm not that crazy about UFC. I find it very savage, but I love traditional boxing, and it's great that there was a big title fight that people gave a shit about. Which reminds me, it was a few years ago at Brad Garrett's Comedy Club, Mike Tyson was doing his one-man show, like I think at like 6 p.m. and or whatever time it started, 6 p.m. He ran it at Brad Garrett's Comedy Club for I don't know, a few months, and I got to meet Tyson and take pictures with him. And I remember when I posted it on Facebook, people were like, "Oh, how could you take pictures with that criminal, with that woman abuser or whatever?" And the man had served his time in prison, and anyway, I thought Mike Tyson was very, very sweet, kind, and gracious when I met the man. And Brad Garrett did a beautiful thing for me. I mean, and Mike Tyson was selling these, I don't know, they were like $50, $100, something like that. But Brad Garrett, as a gift, bought for me a boxing glove signed to Tom Mike Tyson. And I love it. I have it displayed in my home, and it makes me very happy. And again, Brad Garrett's generosity is unparalleled. Oh, so here's another interesting thing is when I perform at Brad Garrett's, I wear a suit on stage most every night. I never wear suits when I perform anymore, but I have a lot of beautiful suits. And, it's Vegas. It's the MGM, I mean. And Brad always looks great in suits. So I like to wear suits when I perform here. And had an interesting, funny thing that happened a few nights ago. I come back to the Signature Towers, and before I go up to my room, I step outside to have a cigarette. And thank you for all the people who sent me lovely messages telling me to stop smoking. I'm working on that, I promise. So I step outside in the outside the entrance area of Signature Tower 3, and there was this blonde woman about, I don't know, 35. I'm out there smoking a cigarette, and I'm away from the door, and this woman is like drunk, and I could tell she was a little mean, and she's just like, she'd come out to smoke, and she's a little drunk, and she goes, "Are you going to a funeral? Why are you wearing black?" And I knew the woman's attitude. I go, "This is gonna be trouble." And I just say, "It's blue. It's not black." And she goes, "No, it's black." And I said, "It's blue." And then she walks over and gets closer, and she goes, "Oh, I love that kind of marine blue." And then she loosens up, and she had a little bit of an accent. And I said, "Where are you from?" And she said, "South Africa, but I grew up in Holland." And I said, "Oh, mevrouw, heel mooi avond. Ik ben Tom." And I shook her hand, and she had such a look of surprise on her face. And I said, "Ben je gelukkig?" which means, "Are you happy?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Ich bin Zielsgelukkig," which means I am happy to my soul. So this is just like the basic little Dutch that I know. But like I fooled this drunk woman, this drunk, mean South African woman, into thinking that I spoke Dutch. And she was like so like blown away. And I'm talking to her and just I was nothing like she had thought I was. She thought I was some business guy or worked there. And I told her I was a comedian performing at Brad Garrett's. And this woman was had started out a drunk, surly bastard, and I had like completely softened her, and she was like blown away and impressed by me. And I told her after I stamped out my cigarette, I said, "Not everyone is a klootzak. You should remember that." And klootzak means asshole in Dutch. I said, "Some of us are just meetjes," which means sissy. So I can't say enough good things about Brad Garrett. I absolutely love the man. I think Brad Garrett should give lessons on how to be famous. That's how classy he is. You know, I know for a fact when Ron Schock and Carl LeBeau, when each one of those comedy legends were dying of cancer, that Brad generously gave them a hunk of money to ease the avalanche of their medical bills and stuff. So, total class act, and you know, often when Brad's there, people will come back into the green room. I don't know who a lot of people these are. But like I know other times. One time I was there. God, Bill Medley, was that the guy that was in the Righteous Brothers? You've lost that love and feeling. He came backstage once. Different Vegas show people, and then other normal people will come in and they'll take photos. Oh, and there was a cool artist guy from Maine that came in this week. And hung out backstage before the show and took photos. But like, you know, there'll be a cavalcade of like normal people. I think some of them are super fans, and then some people know Brad, and then he'll graciously take photos with them. We were working with Omid Singh, beautiful, hilarious comedian, and Brad would go, "Tom, Omid, get up here, take a photo." And so we'd all, you know, take a photo and stuff. And then when there was a couple of groups after they had taken photos, I cracked Brad up because when they were leaving, on the coffee table was a bowl of mints. So I grabbed the bowl of mints, and as they were leaving, I was offering it to each one, and I was saying, "Fill your pockets. Fill your pockets." So I want to really give Brad Garrett credit for like a really great performance thing. Like I was saying, I think he's better than Rickles, and it's hilarious the way he rips people to shreds. So I mentioned what happened on September 11th, which was really odd and weird. And then when he was opening the show with 30 minutes of head-crushing comedy, on September 12th, some woman in the audience raised her hand and said, "Can I ask a question?" And Brad said yes. And the woman said, "Can we have a moment of silence for Charlie Kirk?" And I thought, oh my God, this is, who knows how this is going to go. But Brad was so smooth. The way he said, "No, lady, this is a comedy club. The only time we do moments of silence is when a joke bombs." And then he sidestepped it and moved on. You know, let's be happy at a comedy club. We're there to forget our problems, you know. So just absolutely love that man, and a joy to work with him. And, you know, he treats comedians so well. You just want to knock it out of the park every time when I perform there. A few other great MGM classic moments that have happened. I remember when Joe Rogan and I were friends, he used to hook me up on UFC tickets. And so I would do my show and I would finish and I would run and the MGM is a big property, and I would get there usually in time to see like half of the last fight, like the last, 2 or 3 rounds of whatever the championship thing was. There was one time when Joe hooked me up on tickets, me and it was Brian Regan and Hannibal Buress watched, and that time I got to watch the entire fight, which was great. But that was really cool having that privilege of being Joe Rogan's friend and him hooking me up on tickets when I was playing there. So Brad Garrett's used to be at the MGM was in this basement, and now it's kind of where these nice restaurants are, and then across the way from the club is the food court. But there's also like really fancy restaurants, and then there's a really expensive watch store, which I'll come back to that in a minute. But a few doors down, oh yeah, and adjacent from there, there's a place that sells these bubble bath balls and different soaps and stuff. So you got to stay at the Signature Hotel, the Signature Towers sometime for that jacuzzi bathtub. And you get one of these bubble bath balls, and I'm telling you, it fills, you got to be careful. It'll fill the room like a Disney Herbie the Love Bug movie if you let the water run. But for a few years, there was like a sports memorabilia shop on this little, fancy walkway at the MGM. And Pete Rose would be sitting there. And when I was young, Pete Rose was my favorite baseball player. My dad used to cut my hair in a bowl haircut that, I don't think he planned it that way, but it, looked like Pete Rose. And I remember I used to all kids of a certain age did this when they played Little League. When you would slide, you would dive for the base. Now you see it a lot, but that was like Pete Rose. That was his move. And so Pete Rose would sit in, and you'd have to pay like $75, $100 to get his signature on something. So I still have it. I have this book, and it's Pete Rose's Winning Baseball, something like that. I think I've had it since I was 14. And then I had this poster that I got in Cincinnati, and it was the posters of the Cincinnati Enquirer newspaper the day after Pete Rose won set the record for most hits. And it's like Pete Rose hit king, whatever the number is. Anyway, I brought this stuff in, and I got to talk to Pete for a minute. And, told him I was a comedian, and I remember him telling me, always out-hustle the other guys. That was his mentality, and I think it's, great advice for baseball and for comedy. And anyway, another great thing, I think I said enough about Pete Rose. Russell Peters, this is 8 years ago, because I'm 58 now. Russell Peters was at the MGM, and it was after his show when I had performed there, and there's a really expensive Japanese restaurant there called Mamimoto or Morisato, something like that. So Russell was having a big dinner with some UFC fighters, and there was a bunch of comedians, and then I went over and joined them after the show. And Russell said, "Hey man, I heard you just turned 50." He goes, "That's a big birthday. Come on, take a walk with me." And we took a walk to that expensive watch store that I was mentioning earlier. And this is like maybe a month after my birthday. When I turned 50. And he goes, "Hey man," I want to do something special for you. I want you to pick out any watch you want. And this place, it's still there, and it's just like some seriously expensive watches. And then, for my taste, I thought they were, very bulky moon mission type watches. But there was a tasteful one that was one of the least expensive. And that was the one that I chose. And Russell was going, no, man, come on, you should get, he's trying to get me over to this section where they had more expensive watches. And I was like, no, 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 this one's classy. This one's simple. This is the one I want. And I still have it. It's my favorite watch I've ever owned. And Russell Peters bought it for me for my 50th birthday at the MGM. Grand, baby. Home of the Lions, the Golden Lion. So I want to tell you, it's getting late. I'm sorry. This is the second part of the podcast that I'm recording much later in the evening. But another great, really sweet story that happened with my father. So this is, I think, 1999 or 1998. It was after I had moved back to New York City. And the Rolling Stones were going to play at the MGM Grand. And their tours used to be put on, the Live Nation bought what was the Bill Graham company that was they had the concert monopoly of San Francisco, and then they also owned the Punchline Comedy Clubs. So now that all became part of Live Nation. But once upon a time, the Bill Graham people, they did all the Rolling Stones concerts. And anytime there was a Rolling Stones concert, I got, I would have to pay the face value of the ticket, but they always got me like, within the front 10 rows. I remember, was it 1998 Halloween or 1997? The Rolling Stones played at Dodger Stadium in LA. And I was like in the 8th row, and my seats were so good, I was directly in front of Jack Nicholson. And that's how good these seats were. And I remember the actress that I was dating at the time, and I took her, and I remember I had a bowl of marijuana I packed. And I took all this courage to turn around to Jack Nicholson and go, Mr. Nicholson, can I offer you a bowl? And then he was like an old man. He leaned down, he got his face right over it. And then he tilts his head and he looks me in the eye and he goes, aren't you having any? And I go, I wanted to pack you a fresh bowl. And then he shrugged and took the lighter in one hand and the bowl in another one. And he took a heroic hit and blew it out. And this is during the Rolling Stones concert. It was during one of their new slow songs. I wasn't going to bother him during, Give Me Shelter, or Sympathy for the Devil, or, one of the big ones. So anyway, he hands me the pipe back, and then I turn around, and then the actress woman who I was dating, she goes, aren't you going to offer his date any? And I was just like, what my little mission had been accomplished flawlessly, and I didn't turn back around and offer his woman. I think that was on Jack to have done that, but that was back in a different time. Anyway, I'm glad I didn't end up with that woman. So be grateful for the people who aren't in your life, as I heard a pastor once say. So the Rolling Stones were going to play at the MGM. This is I think 97, 98, something like that. And I had seen the Rolling Stones a few times, so I wanted to take this road trip with my dad and see the Rolling Stones with him. So I had set up with the Bill Graham people who I had gotten many Rolling Stones tickets from beforehand, excuse me. And it was always good as gold. And then we go to the will call before this Rolling Stones concert. And me and my dad are ready to, we're ready to rock. And they did not have my name. They did not have any tickets. And it was the first time there was ever a snafu where I had not gotten hooked up. So my dad and we looked at they got other tickets for shows that were happening at the MGM. And back then in those years, Carrot Top was doing a small room at the MGM. Small. Jesus, it probably sat 500. But we bought tickets to go see Carrot Top. And and it was great. And Carrot Top is hilarious. I've known him from when he started doing open mic nights in Florida. He's one of the sweetest guys, but we had to pay for the tickets, and it was worth every cent. One of my greatest memories of my father is watching Carrot Top with him, and my dad's got a cocktail, and he was laughing his ass off. And as I mentioned before, I loved the sound of my father's laugh. Cherish the people in your life, cherish things like that, the sound of their laugh. And I wish I could hear my father's laugh now, but I have that memory, and I can still see him, swirling his drink, having a sip, throwing his head back, having a good howling laugh at friggin' Carrot Top. And Carrot Top was silly, and it was great. So this past week, I worked with Omid Singh. And Omid, he grew up in Irvine. He lived part of his childhood in Dubai. If I remember correctly, he's half Persian and half Indian. And one of the most lovable, sweetest guys, just his face, you instantly love him. And just great to work with. It was a killer week. I think one of my favorite weeks I've ever done at the MGM. And Omid one night hired a photographer friend to come in and document the evening of, a night at Brad Garrett's from all these different angles. And all of us, me, Brad, and Omid. And the guy took beautiful photos. When I post this episode, I'll post a little barrage of his photos. But, they always say in comedy that likability is 90% of it, the audience liking you. And that's why I think Omid Singh could never not do well, because he's so friggin' likable, and you love everything out of his mouth. And had a really nice day. He had drove, and I flew, and to Vegas, and he took me. We went and had barbecue one day, and I'd never eaten at this place. It's called Rollin' Smoke Barbecue. Let's see, there's two addresses. 3185 South Highland Drive, Suite 2345 in Las Vegas. Or their other location is 4115 South Grand Canyon Drive in Las Vegas. It was some delicious. I had the beef brisket. I had some pulled pork. And for Las Vegas, it was some. I think the people who run it are from Arkansas. That's what Omid told me. Anyway, if you're in Vegas, it's a damn good meal. Oh yeah, and across from Brad Garrett's is Emma Reels, which is one of the old best restaurants in New Orleans. I remember my mom and a couple of her religious women friends had gone there for some retreat, some event. This is 15 years ago, 20 years ago maybe. And I paid for my mother and her friends to go have a nice dinner there, because my mom very seldomly gets to eat in an amazing restaurant. So directly across the walkway from where Brad Garrett's is a friggin' Emma Reels. And God, I haven't had it in 6-7 years, but they have a lobster pot pie. Yum. Anyway, absolutely delicious. And then another thing, in the front bar at Brad Garrett's Comedy Club is Brad has made it a jazz club. And then there's a really fantastic little, jazz ensemble that plays music on Friday and Saturday. Anyway, it's getting late. And I think that's my highlights. I really love the MGM Grand. And I'm grateful to Brad Garrett for opening this holy temple of the ha-ha, and that I get to play there once a year. All right. Hooray for humanity. Hope your life is well. I hope you are worry-free. and that, yeah, you got sand between your toes, getting some sunshine on your face. Be kind. The world needs it. I love you.